21 miles. That's the width of the most important choke point on Earth. 21 miles of water between the Omani coastline and Iran. And through that gap flows 21 million barrels of oil every single day. That's 1/5 of the world's entire oil consumption, 1/4 of all seaborne oil trade, and nearly 20% of global liquefied natural gas. But the actual shipping lanes? They're not 21 miles wide. The navigable corridor is 2 lanes, each just 2 miles across, separated by a 2-mile buffer. 6 miles of usable water carrying the energy that powers civilization. In 2019, Iran proved it could shut those lanes down with limpet mines and drone strikes. In 2026, they did it. And overnight, the world remembered something it had been ignoring for decades. The entire global economy is one naval blockade away from $200 oil. Right now, multiple nations are racing to build their way out of this vulnerability. And a network of emergency routes that, even at maximum capacity, can only cover 45% of what flows through that strait. This is the story of the most expensive infrastructure gamble in the history of energy. Let's break it down. Why Hormuz cannot be replaced, the scale problem. To understand why bypassing Hormuz is so difficult, you need to understand the sheer volume it handles. Saudi Arabia alone pushes 6.23 million barrels per day through the strait, roughly 85% of its total exports. Iraq sends 3.63 million barrels, representing 95% of its exports. Kuwait and Bahrain? 100%. Everything they sell to the world passes through those 6 miles of water. And then there's Qatar, the world's second largest LNG exporter. 112 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas per year, with 93% of that passing through Hormuz. LNG is locked to specific liquefaction plants and specialized tanker terminals. You can't just build a pipe and move gas the way you move crude. Qatar's plants at Ras Laffan are geographically trapped, and there is currently no floating LNG alternative or backup terminal that can redirect that output. Over 80% of the oil and 90% of the LNG that transits the strait is headed to Asia, to China, India, Japan, and South Korea. Goldman Sachs estimates a 1-month halt would push Brent crude up $12 to $15 per barrel, even with maximum use of spare pipeline capacity. A 3-month disruption? Oil past $200. European natural gas prices tripling to over €100 per megawatt hour. The tanker wars. A history of crisis. The vulnerability of Hormuz isn't theoretical. It's been tested in blood repeatedly across 4 decades. During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, both nations systematically attacked each other's oil export infrastructure in what became known as the Tanker War. Between 1984 and 1988, over 500 tankers and commercial vessels were damaged or destroyed. In 1982, the first commercial tanker was hit by Iraqi aircraft. By 1987, an Iraqi Exocet missile killed 37 American sailors aboard the USS Stark in a case of mistaken identity. Months later, an Iranian naval mine damaged the SS Bridgeton, a US-flagged tanker. And in July 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing 290 civilians. In May 2019, 4 tankers were sabotaged off the coast of Fujairah, the very port that was supposed to be the safe alternative. A month later, the Front Altair was set ablaze and the Kokuka Courageous had its hull breached, both allegedly by Iranian mines. The British-flagged Stena Impero was seized by the IRGC Navy using GPS spoofing to lure it into Iranian waters, held for 19 days. Insurance rates spiked, and the world got a preview of what a real closure would look like. Then in March 2026, it happened. Iran effectively closed the strait to non-Iranian vessels. The reported impact: a collective production drop of 10 million barrels per day as storage filled up and traffic halted. Bypass 1. The UAE's Fujairah pipeline. The United Arab Emirates saw this coming earlier than anyone. In 2008, they broke ground on the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline, a DCOP, a 48-inch diameter pipeline stretching 360 kilometers across the Hajar Mountains, plus 14 kilometers of offshore pipeline, from the Habshan oil field to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. It was completed in 2011 and reached full operational status in June 2012. Total cost, roughly $4.2 billion. At the time, it was the single most expensive piece of energy insurance any Gulf state had ever purchased. The specs are impressive. Nameplate capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day, expandable to 1.8 with pump optimization and potentially 2 million with hardware upgrades. The Fujairah terminal has 8 million barrels of storage capacity and 3 single-point mooring buoys that can load crude at a combined rate of 240,000 barrels per hour. When the 2026 crisis hit, utilization surged to nearly 100%. 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels per day covers less than 10% of total straight throughput. It only handles Abu Dhabi's Murban crude. It cannot take exports from Qatar, Kuwait, or Iraq. And Fujairah itself is not immune to attack. The 2019 sabotage incidents prove that even the bypass is vulnerable to the same regional threats. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, hit subscribe. This is the kind of deep geopolitical and engineering analysis we put out every week. Bypass 2, Saudi Arabia's Petroline. Saudi Arabia's answer is the Petroline, the east-west crude oil pipeline, 1,200 kilometers across the Arabian Peninsula, connecting the processing hub at Abqaiq in the eastern province to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Like the UAE pipeline, it was born out of crisis, built in the 1980s specifically to counter the threats of the Iran-Iraq War. The system originally consisted of 2 parallel lines with a design capacity of 5 million barrels per day. But in March 2026, as the crisis escalated, Saudi Aramco pulled off an emergency engineering feat, converting a natural gas liquids line to carry crude, boosting total throughput capacity to 7 million barrels per day. That's a massive number. But there's a catch. Sustainable flows at that level have not been fully tested under long-term stress. Moving oil to Yanbu avoids Hormuz but creates exposure to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, another choke point at the southern tip of the Red Sea, and Houthi rebel activity in Yemen. In May 2019, Houthi drones successfully struck Petroline pumping stations number 8 and number 9, briefly shutting the entire system down. In 2025 and 2026, Houthi maritime attacks in the Red Sea disrupted commercial shipping on a massive scale, proving that this alternative route carries its own severe risks. Routing through the Red Sea means sailing south through Bab el-Mandeb and around the Horn of Africa, dramatically increasing both freight costs and insurance premiums. You solve one choke point and inherit another. Bypass 3, Iraq's desperate alternatives. Iraq is in the worst position of any Gulf state. 95% of its crude exports flow through the Basra oil terminal in the south, directly through Hormuz. Its only alternative has been the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline to Turkey and the Mediterranean, but that route has been disrupted for most of the last decade by ISIS sabotage, structural damage, and a legal fight between Baghdad and the Kurdistan regional government over revenue sharing. As of March 2026, Iraq has moved to restart the northern route independently. The oil minister stated that a rehabilitated 100-kilometer section was undergoing final testing and would be ready to push 200 to 250,000 barrels per day. But that's a drop in the ocean compared to 3.3 million barrels stranded in the south. On paper, there are bigger proposals. A 1 million barrel per day pipeline from Basra to Aqaba, Jordan, estimated at $9 billion. A revival of the Kirkuk to Banias pipeline through Syria at 1.25 million barrels per day. But these projects face financing hurdles, active conflict zones, and political instability that makes construction timelines essentially theoretical. Now we get to the truly massive proposals, the kind of infrastructure that would fundamentally redraw the energy map, if they could be built. The most ambitious is a Saudi-backed feasibility study for a 950-kilometer canal linking the Persian Gulf directly to the Arabian Sea, cutting through Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The envisioned channel would be 150 meters wide and 25 meters deep, large enough for supertankers to bypass Hormuz entirely. Estimated cost, $200 billion. The engineering challenge? The route must overcome elevations of 700 meters, requiring hundreds of locks, each consuming a volume of water equal to a major dam. And experts warn that a canal of this scale could simply create a new high-value choke point, one that could be blocked by a single scuttled vessel. More immediately, Saudi Arabia is pushing for a 300-kilometer pipeline through Yemen's Al-Mahra province to reach the Arabian Sea. the open Indian Ocean far from Iranian influence. Riyadh has already established military bases and seized control of Nashtun port to secure this future corridor. The UAE is taking a different approach. Etihad Rail is nearing completion of a 900-kilometer network connecting the Saudi border to Fujairah. Rail can't move crude at the scale of a supertanker, 1 VLCC equals 10,000 truckloads, but it provides critical logistics backbone for petrochemicals and food supplies, reducing dependency on a single maritime lane. If you add together the maximum capacity of every existing bypass, the Petroline at 7 million, AD-COP at 1.8 million, Kirkuk-Ceyhan at 250,000, you get roughly 9.2 million barrels per day. That covers less than 45% of typical Hormuz throughput. More than 10 million barrels of oil and the entirety of Qatar's LNG exports remain completely exposed to any closure. And even if every project were built on schedule, the physics of pipeline capacity, terminal loading rates, and tanker logistics mean that a full replacement of Hormuz is not achievable in any realistic time frame. The geopolitics of bypass infrastructure are as complex as the engineering. Iran views every pipeline as a direct threat to its asymmetric leverage, its ability to hold the global economy hostage through 6 miles of water. If Gulf states can export without passing through Iranian-controlled waters, Tehran loses its most powerful bargaining chip. After a single test load in late 2024, it's capped at roughly 300,000 barrels per day due to storage and terminal failures, which means Iran would devastate its own economy by closing the strait permanently. The United States has quietly shifted posture. America now imports only 2% of its petroleum from the Gulf, China, and India. China has responded with $39 billion in Belt and Road funding directed towards Saudi Arabia and Iraq in 2024 alone. India, facing 65% dependency on Hormuz oil, is evaluating its strategic petroleum reserves and exploring joint investments in UAE-Oman pipeline infrastructure. 6 miles of water, 21 million barrels a day, $230 billion in proposed alternatives that still can't cover half the flow. That's the math. And it's the reason every government, every energy company, and every military planner on Earth is watching those 6 miles right now. If this is the kind of deep dive you want more of, the engineering, the geopolitics, and the numbers behind how the world actually runs, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.